Well, the world is on track to add nearly 60 dangerously hot days each year. That's according to a new study by climate scientists. They estimate that it will happen by the end of this century. But the research also shows that the Paris Climate Agreement, signed 10 years ago, has had a significant effect in terms of curbing greenhouse gas emissions.
Sweltering heat and cracked Earth. All over the world, global warming is having an impact. And it's getting hotter. Average global temperatures have risen by 0.3 degrees Celsius since 2015, leading to 11 more hot days per year. A decade ago, almost 200 governments came together to sign the Paris Agreement, an international climate accord that obliges nations to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and limit temperature rise to no more than 2 degrees Celsius. Before the agreement was signed, global warming was estimated to reach 4 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels by the end of the century, which scientists say would have led to 114 additional hot days per year. If enacted, pledges made under the accord would limit warming to 2.6 degrees, leading to half the number of hot days. It's progress, say experts, as part of a new study, but more still needs to be done.
We are still not seeing the highest possible ambition, and that is obviously a huge problem, and it is a problem that will be paid for with the lives and livelihoods of the poorest people in the world, in every country.
Heat is the deadliest type of extreme weather, contributing to an estimated 500,000 deaths globally every year. And it's often underestimated. Only around half of countries worldwide have heat early warning systems in place, with coverage uneven and far fewer systems found in Africa, Latin America, and parts of Asia.
People don't have to die from heat. There are measures, relatively straightforward measures, that societies can do to save lives.
World leaders will meet next month to discuss climate action and how to adapt to rising temperatures. But it will take further emissions cuts to limit global warming and its impacts on communities globally.
Let's bring in Theodore Keeping here. He's a climate researcher at the University of Reading in England and co-author of that climate report we were just referring to. He joins us from London. Thanks for being with us. Let's begin with the good news. Your report shows that the projected global warming has dropped from what was projected at 4 degrees Celsius down to 2.6 degrees over the past decade. How significant is this?
This is a really significant reduction in the impacts of projected global warming. So you mentioned in your report there that we're anticipating seeing about 2 more extra months of extreme heat days across the globe. We actually predicted that there would have been 4 extreme heat day months in the previous projection. So this is a really dramatic decrease in the trajectory we're on. Now, obviously, 2 more additional months of very hot days is still highly impactful. We're not on the trajectory we need to be, but I think this is really clear evidence that these international agreements can have some positive impact.
Okay, but still, we're talking about 2.6 degrees of warming over pre-industrial levels on the Earth. That still misses the Paris target of 1.5 degrees. I'm old enough to remember Al Gore giving his tipping point presentation saying that anything over that would be a big problem. Can you describe what 2.6 degrees warmer, a world that much warmer would look like for people and our ecosystems?
Yeah, absolutely. So we looked at a number of extreme heat events around the world that have happened in the last 10 years. So, for example, the heat wave that we saw in 2024 in Europe, or the extremely hot dry season we saw affecting the Amazon rainforest in 2023. And what we saw is that even in the last 10 years, where there's been an increase of only 0.3 degrees of global warming, the likelihood of these events has increased dramatically. So, for example, in the Amazon, we saw an increase of about 10 times of the likelihood of that sort of event in the last 10 years. Or for the southern European heat, we saw the likelihood of a heat wave like that increased by about double. And in the 2.6 climate scenario, we expect that increase in likelihood and severity of these events to keep increasing, up to, for example, an increase of 5 times again for the southern European heat that we saw in 2024.
Now, there's another report that's come out, published by the World Meteorological Organization, and it's found that carbon dioxide emissions reached a record high last year. What does that say about the world's determination to limit global warming?
Yeah, this is a very troubling report. And I think in addition to seeing an increase in emissions, this has also been matched by seeing a really strong increase in the impacts of climate change in the last few years, both in terms of extreme heat, but also other secondary impacts like extreme rainfall and wildfire as well. We're clearly not on the right trajectory, and I think this COP is going to be a really critical meeting to address this overshoot that we are on trajectory for. For example, in the UK, a report came out yesterday saying that we should expect 2 degrees of warming by 2050. So I think people need to revise their timelines. Any action that's in the medium term or long term future is too late if we really want to mitigate the worst impacts of climate change.
And by COP, of course, you're referring to the big climate summit that's going to take place in Brazil next month. Just quickly, U.S. President Donald Trump calls climate change a con job. How can global progress continue with a major power like that opposing climate action?
Yeah, we've seen a huge rise in misinformation on climate in the last year. The US Department of Energy earlier this year published a report minimizing the impacts of fossil fuel emissions on climate change. If we're going to do anything about climate, it's really important that we communicate very clearly and honestly about what these impacts are. What we were trying to do with this report was to make very clear the link between extreme heat days, something that people actually feel, and human-caused global warming due to fossil fuel emissions. I hope that we're able to address this globally, and that the world can be more than the trajectory of one country at one point in time.
Theodore, thank you so much. That was climate scientist Theodore Keeping.
Thank you.
That report by DW's chief climate reporter, Louise Osbourne, who's now with us here in the studio. So, Louise, we've got this new research showing that progress has been made in implementing the historic Paris Agreement, climate agreement from 10 years ago. How significant is this progress?
I mean, it shows that we are getting somewhere, and that the agreement made internationally has or is having an impact. But it's worth noting that 2.6 degrees would only be met as a temperature rise limit if all countries met the pledges and goals that they have made so far. We know that that's not going to be the case at the moment anyway with the US. They are in the process of pulling out of this agreement. And then also 2.6 degrees is still way too high.
So you're talking 2.6 degrees warming since pre-industrial levels of the planet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And countries actually agreed to try to keep temperatures well below 2 degrees, pursuing efforts to keep it to around 1.5. So 2.6 would be still well over that. But still, it is a move in the right direction.
Despite the progress, we know that all regions of the world they're going to experience more extreme weather, that's for sure, especially hotter days, warmer days. What can be done to help these communities adapt who are facing extreme heat?
I mean, one of the major things is having weather warning systems in place so that, communities can make sure that they are prepared for these hot days when they do come. In cities, it's a particular problem, for example, because cities tend to get hotter. So urban planning, making sure that there are enough green spaces, also doing things like the city of Barcelona has done, for example, putting in place climate shelters, so people who don't have access perhaps to air conditioning or to cooler conditions have somewhere that they can go. And most important is looking after vulnerable members of the community, so people who are elderly or who have pre-existing health conditions, making sure they have access to cooler places and are taken care of, and that the healthcare provisions are in place for them.
So there are those mitigation measures for heat that we can do, and this report, it focuses mainly on heat, but there are, of course, other extreme weather events are also being witnessed around the world. Can we expect more of those moving forward?
Completely. I mean, hot weather leads to the conditions that lead to more wildfires, for example. So we can expect to see more wildfires in the future. The atmosphere is also warmer as a result of these heat waves and things, and that holds more water, which means we get heavier rain and potential flooding. Storms are made more volatile and more frequent as a result of climate change. So the warmer conditions are going to lead to more of those things as well. And, governments need to make sure that they are not only taking heat into account, but all of the other things that come with it.
So just briefly, what is the main thing that government should be doing around the world to make sure that they meet their targets?
I mean, like I said before, with the pledges that they have in place at the moment to reduce carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases, we are still looking at a significant rise in temperature that is going to lead to almost 2 months more of hot days, leading to these extreme weather events. Cutting carbon dioxide emissions is the most important thing they can do, and they will be discussing that later this year.
Louise, thank you very much. That was our chief climate reporter, Louise Osbourne.